All right then. This evening we're on to scoping, manage project scope. Okay, we have the peak of the mountain there, so let's try and define it. And we don't know what's around the corner. So project scope management is what it's all about tonight. And we're going to be looking at some of the inputs, the tools, the techniques, and the outputs of project scope management. We're also going to look at it from the process groups and also from the body of knowledge side. So our next slide actually tells us a little bit about it. If we look at our project groups, it's initiating, planning, executing, controlling, and closing. We're going to look at project scope management, which includes scope planning, scope definition, create a work breakdown structure, scope verification, and scope control. Now the first three of those are really got to do with planning, and then the other two have really got to do with monitoring and control. So the actual groups that we're going to be looking at is really planning and monitoring and control when it comes to project scope and the project lifestyle. If we look at project planning and we look at it from a process perspective, we're looking at organizational process assets and environmental enterprise environmental factors, the project charter. So those are some of the inputs that we have. Andrew, can you remember what organizational process assets are and enterprise environmental factors?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Yeah, the enterprise environmental factors obviously is the factors that business operational type. How the business sort of sees making a profit, I suppose, or how it does things.
Yep. And the organisation of the processes and the systems and the procedures.
Yeah, the organisational process assets, obviously the systems that the company holds.
Okay. All right, so what we should come out with is the scope management plan, which is really part of the project management plan as well. So it's a sub plan, if you like, of the project management plan. So that's the preliminary scope statement. So we'll look at that one. And the tools and techniques is obviously the project management methodology is a tool and in itself. And then there would be a whole lot of templates and forms and standards. Even for this one, you will see that there are some templates and forms that actually help you develop your scope, help you control it. How do we control the scope? We'll go through that tonight. We'll look at some of those templates and forms and standards. And the project management methodology itself is a tool to actually help us with the scope planning. Our scope, the planning part of it in itself, becomes a standard and a tool that we can actually use. So if we want to look at the project definition, there's the second one that we have. Scope definition. That's also in planning, and what it does is it helps us with coming up with a scope statement and the requested changes and the project management plan. So that's what it'll be. It'll be an updated project management plan, but there's a lot of inputs into this one. Obviously, it's the preliminary scope statement again, the organizational processes and assets, the environmental factors, and then approved change requests, and obviously the scope management plan. So there we see, that's a nice loop, because what we see is the input is the scope management plan, and the project management plan is actually the output. So there's a control there, and in the scope definition we will see that that's a good thing. So we're getting feedback, which is good for any system. So let's go on to that one. Let's have a look at scope definition, some of the tools and techniques. Let's look at some of these ones. The stakeholder analysis. All right. The stakeholder analysis, there's some good forms on that one. So I'd like you to actually have a look at that, some of the discussion. Unfortunately, I can't do it tonight, but maybe sometime we'll actually have a webinar just on stakeholder analysis. and some other ones that we might find quite useful, some other tools. Then we have product analysis. Now, what's the difference between product analysis? Is not concerned with how the job will be done. It's not what it is. It's the requirement analysis, and the scope is not okay. Requirements analysis versus product analysis. Now you can't see that clearly there, but there is a difference between the two. A requirements analysis and product analysis are two different things. The product has got to do with the product itself. Now that might become part of the project management plan as a definition, but the requirements analysis actually is looking how that job is going to be done, which is a different idea completely. So scope management is essentially, it sets the boundaries of the project. It sets the boundaries of the project, and that ensures a common understanding of what exactly is to be included into the project and what is to be excluded from the project. It's sometimes very important to say what is excluded in the project. I can't remember, Andrew, if you are you in civil construction?
Yes, I am. Yeah, we.
Andrew?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we.
So let's try and work at. Yeah.
Yeah, we put relatively large qualifications, and not necessarily exclusions, but certainly we don't like to use the word exclusions, but certainly clarifications and qualifications on every tender that we put in.
Yeah. I could understand that. Welcome, Deborah and Kim. It's good to have you on tonight. We're actually talking about project scope management, and we're a little while in, so please get home. When we talk about scope and we're talking about exclusion, let's say we were building a road, and there might be after the project there might be re-vegetation or rehabilitation of the environment beyond the boundaries of the road. Now that might be an inclusion or might be an exclusion of a project. So okay, it's a boundary area. Now if we don't say anything about that, if we don't say it's specifically included or it's specifically excluded, it can become an issue and an area of contention. So I think it's quite important that in project management that we actually also look at some exclusions. We say, yes, the project does include this, but we are specifically not going to include something else. Now, I know that's often difficult to do when you're putting in a tender. All right, we have a few more. So welcome to Colin as well. The second thing is that we are defining and managing the project scope influences. The project scope influences the project's overall success. So scope is probably the most important technique that we're going to learn. It's probably the most important thing that a project manager has to manage. I think if we looked at right in the beginning, we looked at some of the things that are going to cause project failure. It was actually inadequate project definition and scope definition, because scope creep can actually kill a project very, very, very quickly. So that's where we look at scope management. We're on to the next slide then, and that is defining the scope of the project involves at first a definition of the project objectives, the project boundaries, and the project deliverables. So what are the project objectives? Anybody give me an idea of what project objectives would be and what the difference between a project objective and a project boundary would be? We've got quite a few of you on here. If someone would like to just give me an idea, put up your hand. Anybody want to try and define the difference between an objective and a boundary? Okay, Colin's got it there. He says the objective being the aim or the outcome. Okay, Graham, then let's look at the difference between the objective and the deliverable. what do you think the deliverable will be? All right, you've given us another one. The boundary being a boundary being areas not to be touched. Yes, I would agree with you. A boundary is saying, hey, we're going to go to this part and no more. Okay, Will has just said requires a strategy or a methodology to achieve. I would say that's part of it, Will. I think it's part of your objective statement. Does anybody remember SMART? If we look at a SMART objective, what we're looking at is a statement that is strategic, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's time framed, and I can't remember what the R is. Anybody can remember what the R is? Must be tangible. That's right. That's the S one as well. It must be tangible. So an objective has got to do with something that you want to meet, and it's got a lot to do with more of the strategic issues of the business. The objectives of normally what is aligned to the strategy of the business. The project deliverables are what the customer wants, okay, or the client wants. So in other words, out of this project, he wants to see a deliverable or he wants these. Either a service has to be delivered or a product has to be delivered, and that's what we would call a deliverable. Whereas the objectives are more the alignment of the project to strategic objectives of the company or organization or whatever we're doing. The boundaries. Boundaries are the things that we want to say, hey, this is how far we're going to go, and this is where we're not going to go. This is where inclusions and exclusions are very important for a project. So it involves at first a definition of the project objectives, the boundaries, and the deliverables. Right, let's have a closer look at this. What are we doing? Why are we doing this project? So project objectives are the motivation for doing the project. That's why it's strategically aligned. Whenever you ask the question why, we want to know the motive for doing something. We want to know if we want to do it. It's the value system, if you like. It's why do we want to do it is got to do with answering what it is. So project objectives must be specific and measurable. We said that already. To assist in defining objectives, we sometimes ask the following questions. All right, who, what, when, and how much? All right, who, what, when, and how much? All right, so it's a good way to look at that. Obviously, the SMART comes into that as well. Then there are many deliverables from the project office. Many deliverables from projects, and organizations normally have templates to establish to ensure that the deliverables are not forgotten in a project. So deliverables are also included are things such as the specification documents. Remember I said there's a difference between a product analysis and a requirements analysis. All right, and specification documents normally have got to do with specifying the product or the service that has to be delivered. Design documents have got to do with identifying what the product is. Okay, rollout plans have got to do with the structure of it. How is this thing going to be rolled out? How is it going to be done? Training manuals, scope projects, and then deliverables. Yes, the scope project statement as part of the deliverables of the project. Right. R is relevant. Thank you, Graham. Colin, I appreciate that. I couldn't remember that for a minute. That's right. It has to be relevant. All right. So we got the SMART there. Hey? Wow. Let's look at some of the scope statement. Project scope statement should include the following things. Okay, the project objectives, a scope description. In other words, a good description of the scope. What does it include in a brief? Let's call it an abstract. All right. This sometimes you can call it an abstract. It's going to tell us briefly what this is about, what the project is about. Project requirements, the boundaries are those things that are included or excluded. Project deliverables are those actual things that you're going to give to someone. All right, the client is actually going to get. So it's either a product or a service. Right? The acceptance criteria. Oh, that is so important in project scoping. Is what is the criteria for acceptance? How good must it be? All right, how good must this be? What are the things that the client must say? Yes, if these things are there, and if these things are signed off, this is your project deliverable. This is a deliverable, and it's done, and you can say it. If you do that up front, then the arguments are relieved later on, but nobody can remember what the criteria would be for a particular deliverable. If you don't do it up front, you're going to have an argument and scope creep somewhere in the middle of your project. You'll come to your first phase, and you'll say, right, please sign off, Mr. Client. And the client is going to say, well, that's not really what I wanted. And you say, but you agreed to these deliverables. He's going to say, yes, but this is not right, and this is not right, and I wanted more of this or less of this. So project acceptance criteria needs to be defined right up front. And that also is the project constraints and project assumptions. So now let's look at a constraint. What would a constraint be? Anybody hazard a guess at what a project constraint would be? What about two things in a limiting factor? Yes, a limiting factor. What would a limiting factor? Give me an idea of a limiting. Money, budget, that's it. There we're hitting the right one. Time could also be, right? Yes, Colin, like time, money. Quality could be a limiting factor. Absolutely. Quality could be a limiting factor because the quality needs to be at a particular rate and it becomes costly to do it. Wow, now we're getting lots. Resources, Kim, that's absolutely right. Resources, social, human, physical. Yeah, I would agree with Will on that one. And Andrew's also written resources. So there we've got some ideas of some of the constraints. Resources are certainly constraints. So what would an assumption be then? Come on, let's look at an assumption. What would an assumption be? Idea of an assumption. We say that we are assuming something. Now, someone used to say to me that an assumption is something that makes an ass out of you and me. So I'm not sure. Commitment is a very good one. That's right. Thanks, Colin. All right. It's because we've assumed something and we haven't made that assumption known. All right. Industry practice is a good assumption. I like that one. All right. So you assume in this one that we are going to be using, but you highlighted a project assumption saying we assume that this is the industry standard that we're going to be using, or industry practice that we're going to be doing. So when you outline your project assumption, you're going to say we are assuming this. If it is not there, then you need to change it. But up front, when you say you're assuming this, the project manager needs to look at this thing and you do a SWOT analysis, say, hey, we haven't got anything. The client hasn't told us anything about what we do in this area. So what we do in the project scope is that we highlight that scope. We highlight that assumption and we say, yes, we're going to do that. That's a good one. Currency of intelligence is very good. And capabilities. Capability is a huge issue. We often neglect two things in projects, and that is the capacity of us to be able to do something and the capability of us to do something. And we just might not have that capability. So it's very important to actually make that assumption. One way of doing that assumption is saying we assume that a certain amount of training needs to be taken place before this can take place, because that's going to have a cost constraint on us. So assumptions are normally assuming things that are going to have an impact on our change control as well. Now, if we look at it, we have the initial project organization that should come out of your project scope statement, and an initial identification of risks. Okay, so we're already starting to look at some of the risks. Risks and assumptions go very nicely together, all right? Risks and assumptions go very nicely together. We could even put in a schedule of milestones, and we should be able to, at this stage, be able to start estimating the cost. Right? Remember, we can do an iterative thing here, and it's often iterative when we're in this phase, because you're going to go a couple of times to your client and say, well, we think the project looks like this, and he's going to say, no, I don't like these assumptions that you brought up here, or these constraints. I'm a bit worried about these constraints. He might say, no, 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 I want this included, and we've got it excluded. So project deliverables and boundaries. So these things might come up, but we should be able to come up with some sort of cost management. And the other thing that comes in our scope management right now is the configuration management. What do we mean by configuration management? Everybody has it a guess at configuration management. Losing my audio. Is that okay, Will? Am I better now? I'm full on everything, so I'm sorry if we're losing it. Better now. Okay, thank you, Will. All right, so we're looking at configuration management. Can anybody give us, what is configuration management? What is a configuration? What are we configuring when we say that? Okay, let me put this out to you. What do you think of the system? The whole system that we're actually putting out to do with the arrangement of something. That's quite good. So I would like to see it as the system. All right, it's the system that's going to make this project actually work. All right, it's the assembling of all those things that are there. So it could be a group of people. It could be a group of assets that we're going to use. It could be something that's going to use it. Now, if we change something on the project, it's going to affect that configuration. So if we tell them up front how this thing is configured, we can make changes, and then the configuration management tells us how we're actually going to make those changes. All right, the assembling the bits together for the project. Yes, I like what Will has said there. So configuration management is a definition, if you like, of all the pieces that need to be put together, and how, if there's an impact, what is it going to change? Right. So let's say we're putting together a power station. All right. So a power station would have a generator, and it would have transformers, and it would have monitoring equipment, and all those monitoring equipment will be put together to generate that. Now, to put that together, you would have a configuration plan. All right. And if something changed, then it's going to impact your configuration. So that's why we need configuration management. Okay, the other one is the approval requirements. Approval requirements. Now this, if we don't get this up front, we're going to have another problem. All right. And that's got a lot to do with delegation now. And you as a project manager needs to know this one as well. If you are responsible, remember we talked about how many of you are working in functional organizations. If you're working in a functional organization, this is absolutely critical, because the delegation rights, how much and who needs to approve at what level. Now, it might be that the client or a project board might be the only one that can approve a change that needs a budget change. Right? Does that make sense? You might say in your approval requirements that any change to the project that requires a budget change will have to be approved by the board or the client. Right? Any change that actually is for the good of the project but doesn't need a budget change and has a minor impact on time, maybe the project manager changes. Because you don't want everything to go up that doesn't have a major impact on the project. So there is a delegation of at what level approval comes. It's obvious that every phase needs to be signed off, and on the phases of a project, it's highly recommended that the client signs off on it, and that the project board, if you've structured it as a board, has an impact on that decision. So those are approval requirements. If those are done up front, you will have a lot less problems down the road. So now we come to the next part of the planning part of this one, and that we get to the work breakdown structure. Now this is a flexible yet a structured thing. flexible yet it's structured, and there's a number of ways that we can actually look at work breakdown structures. It's still in the planning phase of our project, so we're actually planning. It's obviously beyond the project initiation stage. All right, so we're actually getting down to the planning now, the detailed planning of something, of a project. So let's look at the work breakdown structure. That's just what it is. It doesn't look like that Forksy that's out there. All right, that's not a work breakdown structure the way that we see it. Although that's getting broken down, I think that's been used for spares. Let's look at what it is. It's an assembling. It is the definition of what? All right, let's have a look at this. It should be deliverable orientated. And it is hierarchical in structure. It's a decomposition of the work to be executed by the project team to accomplish project objectives and create the required deliverables. Okay, so that's what a work breakdown structure is. However, it also organizes and defines the total scope of the project. That's why it's in part of scope management. When we get down to this one, this is where we like to use project. MS Project is a fantastic tool for work breakdown structures, right? Because you can build a Gantt chart, and you can build a network chart, and you can build resource leveling, and you can put all of these things. This is what we're talking about when we're getting down to work breakdown structure. We can try and find out what lead times are and what lag times are. This is when it's now that we get to an area that MS Project and those type of things really help us a lot as a tool to get the total definition of the scope of the project. And the work breakdown structure divides the project into smaller and smaller and more manageable pieces of work. Right? What we really want to get down to is a very small work group, and perhaps in some cases individuals. So it's what we want to get down to is manageable pieces of work. All right. So if we're building a building, then laying the foundations is not what you want. What you want is even a further breakdown as to how those foundations need to be laid. So it's a small piece of work. All right. And then these work packages, if you like, can be scheduled. Easy to share. You see, we want to get it to the point where it's easy to be scheduled, that the cost estimate can be accurate, that it's easy to monitor, and it's easy to control. What we're saying is, if I take this piece of work, I can say, hey, this is a good percentage done. So I can break it down into, say, hey, 20% done, 40% done, 50% done, 80% done, and you can see it. So you can actually manage that, and you can see, well, if this work package is small enough for us to manage, what is the impact going to be on the big project? If the work breakdown structure does not go down small enough, and something goes wrong with it, then it impacts the project much more. So the work packages should only have a small impact on your project. So if something goes wrong with it, it overshoots a lead time, or something goes wrong, what is the whole impact going to be? Now that's where MS Project really helps us. We can actually see what happens if something goes over. We can see the critical path. But what we want to do is to be able to get a work package down to a manageable and a controllable entity. Okay, so that's the idea of work breakdown. So it's an idea of divide and conquer, right? Divide and conquer. So the work breakdown construction contains all the project work tasks. Now, let's have a look at this breakdown structure from a different perspective. This is going to be your tool for monitoring any kind of assigned work. Because in your work breakdown structure, and if you're using some nice tools that we have, like Microsoft or another one was Project Scheduler. There's There's quite a few of them. There's even some now on the net that you can do, SOS ones, and I think Deborah sent us some things which I haven't actually looked at yet, Debbie. I'm sorry. But there are some tools that can actually help us with this one. There we are, Primavera. I said Primavera because Primavera is used in some of the bigger organizations. Asta, yes, that's a good one. So there we have some more. But this is where the tool is really going to help us, and it's going to help us monitor it. All right, so let's look at some of these things. It's obviously derived from the project schedule. All right, we start with the milestones, and we start breaking down the milestones. Project schedule, what has to be done, what are the dependencies? We always look at the previous one. What is this task going to be? What's dependent on this one? What has to be done before this one? And we do this during the development of the project. We don't want to wait until the project actually comes before we actually do it. However, I want to say this. Sometimes it's not possible in the project phases to be able to get down to this level straight away. And I want to show you some work breakdown structures that actually help you that. For example, you might have phasing of a project and you might not be able to detail the work packages until some previous phase has actually been completed. So when I say that this is in the planning phase of it, we might even be in the execution of one project or one phase, and we're actually in the planning of the next phase. So when I say that everything has to be planned up front, in some cases it's not possible. We'll look at some of those work breakdown. So any work that is performed by the member of the project team must be part of the work breakdown structure. That is so critical. All right, the project team member is often going to be a leader in his own part anyway, and so you cannot have project members or project team members left out of the work breakdown structure. Right, and that's where the accountability comes in. A project team member is going to be part of every single task that you actually put down there. Not part of every task, but he's going to be part of the tasks that team member is going to be responsible for. Right, now we have updated, it's updated periodically. That makes sense, doesn't it? That's why we have the tools like we have. Right, Andrew's just said some things and I wasn't watching. So he says, yeah, often work breakdown is driven by the intermediate milestones and constraints. And I agree with him wholeheartedly on that. Okay, there are intermediate milestones that have to be met and you can't actually do the next ones until the other one's done. And that's quite acceptable. In fact, in some of the agile project methodologies that are coming out right now, very seldom have they actually, in the agile ones, that they actually define very carefully how the other one, how the next phase is going to be, especially in computer projects. They go in an iterative. It's actually data warehousing that I can remember that they actually go in an iterative one where I don't want to get into that tonight. But the whole issue is that you can go into an iterative thing where we do something in a small thing. You don't plan the rest of it until the first one's done. And if the client is happy with this part, then you take the next part. It can often be a very good thing when you're developing software. Now, let me get on to the next one. All right, let's create a work breakdown structure. So to create it, we've got the scope management plan. We have, which is going to give us scope statement, the project change request, the organizational assets, and what we want to get out of it. So here are some of the tools. There will be work breakdown templates. There will be a decomposition of it. We will see the content of everyone. We'll see the deliverables, all the deliverables for the project and the product development, and the project management. So we're going to see the deliverables. So here are the outputs. I was going to get to. You're going to have a scope baseline. Now, why do we have a scope baseline? I've got a question here. Why do we have a scope baseline? What's the baseline for? What do we use the baseline for? So we can, I like that, Colin. Okay, the baseline is there, so we've got something to start with measuring. Okay, if we define the baseline up front, we can start measuring a deviation. And what that can do is it can help us with a dashboard of actually understanding when something's starting to get critical within a project. So a baseline, if we start seeing too many things happening and we're deviating too far from the baseline, it gives us a warning sign that says to us, hey, something's not right here. We need to change something. So we need to look at the baseline actually helps us to do that. Yes. Basis for our project to measure against. Yep, absolutely. It's those three things again, isn't it? Cost, time, that triangle. It's that triangle. All right, the cost, the time, the resources. And that's basically what the baseline gives us. Right? Anybody know what a work breakdown structure dictionary is? And why would we need that as an output? Why would that be important? Okay, what's a work breakdown structure dictionary? Yes, I thought we were going to have a problem with this one. All right. In larger projects, it's quite important to define your milestones and what you mean by certain things. Because remember, often with work breakdown structures, it's technical. But the stakeholders are not technical. Does that make sense? Often when we get down to the smaller details of a work breakdown structure, it becomes technical. And what the dictionary does, it helps us explain to non-technical people what the work package actually entails. What does this work package entail? It's critically important for communication. You're going to see that this ties in to your project communication. So a work breakdown structure dictionary is important in doing it. Actually, I have a definition for you. Let me just read you the definition of this work breakdown structure dictionary. The reason why I knew this was going to be a problem because it comes up so often as a what on earth do we do this? And that's because a lot of people don't use a work breakdown structure dictionary. It is an output and also an input. It is a document that describes each component of the work breakdown structure. For each work breakdown structure component, the work breakdown structure dictionary includes a brief definition of the scope or statement of the work. It defines the deliverables. It lists the associated activities and the list of milestones. Other information may include the responsibility organization, the start and end dates, the resources required, an estimated cost, a charge number, a contract information, quality requirements, and technical references to facilitate the performance of work. Now, if you look at that kind of information, it's all those notes that go into the project in your project management software, right? It's those notes that go in there. But what this does, it on a bigger scale, it actually defines for anybody picking up this project. Like I said, it's going to define for a stakeholder to be able to read that quite clearly. But it also does other things. It helps with the communication. So if this work package is done by an outside contractor, all those details are there. So it's all in one place. It becomes a nice database to go and find out what has to be done, who's doing this one, and what it's all about. So that's what a work breakdown structure dictionary is. All right, when we come to it, it's also the update to the scope statement, the update to the scope management plan, and the change requests. Now, you're going to say to me, why have we got change requests already? There might be. We are now in the detailed planning stage of the project. Remember, it's not the first stage of the project when we're doing this part of the work, and there could already be changes from the project initiation stage to the detailed planning stage. And you're going to need change requests even from here. Does that make sense? Because the initiation, what you're getting is the mandate to do the project. And if in your detailed planning there is changes to that initial project, you need to be able to record it somewhere. And I expect that in the planning phase, you're going to get a lot of change requests. Because what comes out of your detailed planning may not be identically aligned to what you were mandated for. So this is an opportunity in your detailed planning to ensure that what you mandated for is actually getting into it. And when you finish your detailed planning, your mandate needs to be updated. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Have I made myself clear about change requests in the planning phase? Do you have, please just give me some sort of feedback. Okay. All right. So Andrew says yes, he understands that. Will has said yes. Okay, so we're getting some ideas here. Matthew's okay. All right, I'm getting some sort of feedback. Yes, I think so. I hope so. All right. Okay, let me just try and summarize it. We said that there are project groups, and the first group is project initialization. Now, when you do your project initialization, you do not have a complete scope. You have an initial scope statement. By the time you finish your project planning, you will have a detailed scope. Between that initial scope and the detailed plan, there are going to be changes. And your change requests start up front from your initialization, because you're going to make changes to that initial scope statement, and it needs to be documented. All right, let's go on to the next phase. Here is a work breakdown structure, and this one is done by phases and deliverables, if you like. And at the top there you will see phase 1, phase 2. Do you want me to make this full screen so maybe a little bit better? Whoops, there we go. Does that look a bit clearer then? You have phase 1, you have phase 2, you have deliverable, you have sub-projects, and you can see that it's broken down again into deliverable 2.1, deliverable 2.3. You can see how it's actually been broken down to smaller work packages, and you can see that we've got numbers there. That often happens in project management software to actually help us with that one. I'm just back here again. So that's one way of breaking down a project. Here's another way of breaking down a project. Now this one is organized in phases. All right, there's the project management, and there's the planning and meetings and administration. Here's another one, the project requirements, okay, or product requirements. And there's the software and the user documentation and the training materials. And then we get to the detailed design. Okay, and we have the software again, and we use user documentation again, and we have training manuals again. We get to the construction phase, and we have it. So this one is organized by phases. This one is often done from a project developing software. This is fairly common in developing software. Now here's another way of breaking down structures. Right, this is organized by deliverables. Right, you'll see there's the phase, there's the system engineering management, and there's supporting project management activities. But then we have training. All right, so we have training before we start on there. We have equipment training, and we have facilities training, and we have services training. And then we have the data, the technical orders, the engineering data, the management data. Okay, this one's got to do with building an aircraft. All right, so the second one is the next is by the phase. So we've got all the engineering documents that come out of training. We have all the data from the engineering details, and then we have the airframe, the engine, the communication system, the navigation system, the fire control system. And then we start looking at support equipment, okay, and the maintenance equipment for that aircraft. All right, so on an organization level, on an intermediate, and on a depot level. Then we're going to look at the facilities. If we're going to have an aircraft, what are the facilities that need to be done? What's the maintenance facility look like? And all of these are part of the project. So this one is a work breakdown organized by particular deliverables. And now you can see that each one of those deliverables could have a project manager in its own right, and they would be sub-projects in some way. Looking at the facilities, looking at the test and evaluation, which is absolutely critical in an aircraft because we don't want it to crash. But the whole testing and evaluation starts at the same time as you're doing your equipment training. So there we go back to the again. So that's the way that this one could be broken down. All right, does that make sense? Can I get on to scope verification? Is everybody fair on that one? If you're all okay on that one and nobody says no, I'm going to go on to the next one, the scope verification. Scope verification comes into the into the monitoring and control phase of things. All right, if you like, it's executing and control. Right, and in that one, what we're going to look at are the following. Right, we've got our work breakdown structure dictionary, if you like, and our project scope management plan, and we've got a scope statement, and we've got deliverables, and we've identified and we've written down those deliverables. Now what's going to happen is, as we're monitoring the project, as a project manager, we're going to try and inspect the things that are doing, right? So the most important part of this one, scope verification, is inspection. We're going to be inspecting things and trying to find out if it's on track. So we're going to look at these ones. So accepted deliverables is the output of this one. Requested changes. So changes to the project structure, or changes to a deliverable, or changes, any kind of change needs to be there. And that's because you've got your approvals right as well. Recommended corrective actions. Right, and these are all going to go into a lessons learned database, aren't they? So there we are. Now let's have a look at project control. And there again is your breakdown, your work breakdown structure, your dictionary, your scope, and everything to do with scope. Your scope management is there. Your work performance information. Now that's a new one for this one. Your work performance information. How long should something take? The standards for that. All right, that's your work performance information. The standards to perform that work. How long should it actually take? Because some things could come and we expect it to take so long, but it doesn't take long. It takes longer than those. And we can look at some of those. Now here we're having a look at an update to a scope statement. Right, you're looking the update to your scope baseline. Why are you going to? What you will do is you'll keep your baseline constant. But what you have is you have a new baseline. That's the way that I would do it anyway. So you'll keep your original baseline, and then you can update your scope baseline, and you have a new one. So you have version 1, version 2, version 3 of your baseline. And then you have Will, yes, what can I? You want to? Have you got a microphone, Will? You're open. You want me to explain the baseline a bit more? Will, just help me out a little bit. Which one do you want a little bit more? The scope statement or the baseline? Oh, the difference between the change to the baseline and the statement. Okay. Your scope statement can be, well, you should keep your original scope statement. I'm not saying that you should get rid of it, but you should update your scope statement. If there's a change that's going to impact your scope, you need to update that statement. And it needs to be communicated. This is going to come back down to your communication structure as well. When you finish planning your detailed planning, you're going to have a baseline. And we said your baseline becomes a tool if your verification, if you start getting too many changes within it, your baseline is going to say to you, hey, but this is where we should be, and this is changing. That means that the project is changing too dramatically for us to do things. And there might even be a bailout point and say, hey, this project is not going to be viable anymore. And that really comes down from your baseline. But if there is a change, what you want to do is also change your baseline to another version. In other words, you're going to run your project. If you have a change to your baseline, you're going to run it to your original baseline, but you're also going to look at it at differences from your second baseline. So if there's a major change, your work breakdown structure, and your time and your costs change, you want to have a second baseline. You want to have a version 2 of your baseline. Why? Because it's going to get, the more changes you have on that, the tighter and tighter it's going to get the project being viable. Okay, because your original project, remember our triangle, if we move a deliverable and we change a deliverable, we change a cost, or we change the time factor in something, any kind of a change, but the most important changes are obviously deliverables. It's often deliverables that want to change, and it's going to have an impact on your time and your cost. Once you've got a baseline and we start changing too many times, then the project then says, well, we have a problem on the project. Your client is going to say to me that this project now is getting out of hand and it's becoming unviable. Now, I would never change your original base, but if you have to update your scope base, make it a version 2. When you make it a version 2, you're going to have tighter and tighter controls on it. I hope that makes it a little bit okay. So there can be, as well as just put here, a measurable analysis made to ensure the change baseline does not derail the initial scope of the project. I like the way that he put it. Nice and clear. That's exactly what I believe it is. Right. Updates to the work breakdown, updates to the dictionary. There's going to be a lot of updates to your work breakdown structure. There's always will be in those changes. And there will be a lot of changes to your project dictionary. But it's also going to make sure that your project management plans get updated as well. That's your scope control. And that's the responsibility of your project manager. So your tools are your change control system that you put in place to make sure. Remember, that is also what comes into here when I said originally in your scope management, and I said to you, who is going to sign off on this one? Your acceptance system. Where can someone sign off? That is a really important part of your change control system. It's analysis, all right? That's why I was talking about now with your version 2 of your baseline. Your variance analysis is a critical tool for project management. Replanning. Let's talk about replanning quickly. You might come to something and it's going to have a huge impact. Then you need to do a risk analysis. And what you need to do is go back to your client and say, let's remandate this. In other words, get another mandate. In other words, the change is so big that it's going to have a huge impact. Now, I can think of an aeroplane, right? We get down to it and we get down to the wings and we find that the wings are going to have such an impact on this aeroplane that we need to remandate this and we need to replan it. And it might be viable within the project objectives to actually go and do that. But we have to take that replanning and go right through the whole mandating process again. Right? And then it's going to change our configuration. It's going to change all of the things that we're actually going to do. So if we're going to change the wings on an aircraft, but it has because in the developing of it, we came across such a new idea, and this might really impact that. One of my things I said to you, there was a construction company that was moving the Johannesburg Stock Exchange from the center of Johannesburg to Sandton, which was the elite part of the new part of Johannesburg, and the construction company found they had a fair amount in their budget to do something. So what they wanted to do was move and put in the furniture for the executive. So basically at a certain level upwards, they wouldn't move the office. They would actually literally buy everything that they needed on there. So all the computers, all the furniture, all of that would be bought in there. So they could actually work up until the Friday afternoon. On the Monday morning when they went in there, they would actually have the thing. Now that is a huge major change. Okay, you're going to use up a huge budget to do that. But the construction company thought that that would be a very good feather in their cap if they could do something like that for the client. In other words, the client would say, wow, this is really a great company. Look what they've done. They've come with us. They didn't take the profit of that organization. They've actually done something with that budget. And obviously, they're going to recommend the construction company again to somebody else. So from instead of wasting the money or taking it as profit, what they've done is they've plowed it back into the project. But in order to do that, they've made a major change one. Now, to do that mandate, I can tell you now, it was the CEO of the company, the construction company, that actually signed it off. So they gave the mandate for it. Right? That's replanning. Right? I hope that actually helps with that one. All right, let me go on a little bit. So, let's look at the anatomy of a change quickly. A change is needed. So we need to create a change request. We need to get the change approved. We need to do a variance analysis, and we need to replan the work, and we need to create a new baseline. Do you see what I'm talking about, a new baseline? We need to create a new baseline. So we've got a baseline, and now we've got another baseline. All right, so we're going to have versions of it. Let's look at the variance analysis. The variance analysis is the difference between the actual and the baseline. The variance analysis is between the actual and the baseline. So you've got, let's do it for clarity again. You've got version 1 of your baseline. You're going to do a variance analysis on that one. You've got a new baseline. You're going to do a variance analysis on your new baseline. And then you're going to look at replanning. We're going to revisit the plans and adjust them to include the new work. And then finally, we're going to store that information about the deliverables already completed and any of the changes that require in the new version. And it's a set of applications that allow us to track our work in deliverables. So it's a set of applications that allow us to track our work in deliverables. That's what those are. All right. Let me ask a question. Which one of those do you think? Has a question similar to the initial questions that you actually had? Anybody want to hazard a guess at the right answer on that one? Come on. Somebody give me some answer to this one. All right, is it A, B, or C? Come on, guys. C. Okay, Colin's got a C. Good for you, Colin. Matthew's got a C. Wow. Oh, no, I think you guys are just copying each other. All right. I think you're just copying each other. So what one is it? Gee. You guys already know project management, right? It was fairly easy, wasn't it? Okay, that's exactly what it was. C was the right answer. Look at that, hey? Great minds think alike. Okay. Okay. So, that's me for tonight. Sure, not bad. I didn't give much time for us for, well, Colin, I'm not sure about that. Alright. So we are done for the evening. Are there any questions? We're going to go into a question and answer session later on. If you'd like to join us in a half an hour's time, that would be really good. From a half an hour's time, we'll do a question and answer session. So if you'd like to, come and join us for that time, and let's have some of that time together. Okay, so if you're all okay with this one, then I'm going to end the session. Colin says big projects that should be used. Yes. You know, Colin, in the front of that project management book, there is a very good. Let me just see if I can get the page for you. A very good table on looking at big projects and light projects and minor projects. And yes, some of these things are for bigger projects. Some of them are for lighter projects. And we're going to have to, you're not going to do a work breakdown dictionary for a small project, because you'll be so busy worrying about the administration that you're not going to get your project done. I'm trying to look for the page where it actually gives you a good idea of what you're going to do with different size projects. I really quite like that one. Where is it? Sure, it's on there. I think it's on. Let me just get that one quickly. Yeah, really. Aligning projects with strategy, business focus. No, it's not that one. In the project management by Stephen Hartley, on page 48. On page 48, you're going to see some of the criteria that you want on the project. You got it. Well done. Okay, guys, that's a very good thing to look at. To look at what you're going to do. It also gives you the size of projects that you're going to need. Okay, so how big or how are you going to schedule time? Well, Don't schedule a project that's less than a month. All right. You need to do budget forecasting. For a lean project, no. For a light project that's greater than 50,000, yes. Or for a large project, okay? You're going to look at your risk exposure. What it is. So that'll actually give us a good idea. And from that whole section on project governance is really good. All right. Anything else? All right. Please join me if there's some questions and answers. If you'd like to email me some of the questions and answers, then you're very welcome to do that, and I will bring them up. I haven't had too many for this time, so at 7 o'clock we will go into it. See you later. Yes, she actually sent it to me, and I will be sending it to you. All right, then. I'm going to say good night. Thank you very much. PM complete. Okay, Graham, that's great. Right, I will be saying good night.